Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Okay, so today's video is all about some angsty romances. So I absolutely love angst. Angst is like my favorite thing in a book. Angsty romances over cozy romances every single day of the week. Like, I want to feel emotionally destroyed with an HEA. So every single book that I'm talking about today is a romance with a guaranteed happily ever after at the end. So you're going to suffer while you read these books, but at the end you're going to be happy about it, okay? So one of the things that I want to mention too is that oftentimes when people talk about angsty romances, one of the go-to things is cheating. Now, I feel like angst, well, the true definition of angst is internal turmoil. It's something internal that's keeping this couple apart. There's not an external force keeping them apart. So I feel like that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. But every single book on this list, I feel like the angst was very high, and cheating is not really the main plot point in here. There may be some instances in some of these books where that feeling of, are they interested in another person, is there, but that's not the main focus here. This is just a lot of internal suffering forces keeping them apart, and they're so freaking good, and I'm so excited to share them with you. So the first book that I want to talk about is Restore Me by Jl Seegers. You may have seen this cover around. I absolutely love this cover. However, I got the special edition cover, which I also really love. This book is one of my favorite books of the year. I read this book, and within just the first chapter, I was like, wow, this is an author to watch. So this is a Black romance. It's a contemporary romance, and it is full of just emotional turmoil, but also happiness and also sexiness. So anyway, let's get into it. So this book is about Sloane. She is a widow of 4 years. She met the love of her life in college. They got married and they had a happy life, and then there was an accident and he was killed. So she is definitely suffering with some grief and really struggling to move on from that, as is, you know, that's a theme in another book coming down the road. Hello, Cosmo. Hello, Cosmo. So, the love interest in this book is Dom, who is her dead husband's best friend. Now, Dom and Sloane had a meeting before she got married, before she even met the man that she married, and Dom felt this instant, powerful, soul-level connection with her. And she did too, however, she was drunk, and she doesn't remember it. So when he meets her and realizes she's with his best friend, he immediately is just like shot to the chest, you know? And from that point on, he treats her with a lot of disdain and almost cruelty, because for one, he's upset that she doesn't remember him, and for two, he wants to keep her at arm's distance because he can see that his best friend loves her. So once he passes away, Sloane and Dom are thrown into this work relationship, and that antagonism is still very much there. But very, very gradually, and in a very beautiful, beautiful, seductive, and swoony way, Dom starts to show a different side of her to her that leads her to believe that, does he actually hate me? What's been going on all this time when I felt like he hated me? Has he been hiding these feelings this whole time? And she's struggling with the fact of the guilt of not remembering him when she finds that out, but also the guilt of moving on and having deep feelings for her dead husband's best friend. So, oh my gosh, this book is amazing, and I want everyone to read it. I love it so, so freaking much. So again, you may have seen this cover. This is the cover that's on Kindle Unlimited. I recommend this book to everyone. I freaking love it. And if you love emotion, angst, swoon, and a hero who literally worships the heroine, like, you have to read this. You have to. Okay, the next book I want to talk about is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty. This book, wow, this book has so much angst. It is absolutely stunningly written. It's full of emotion. It's full of thought. And again, this is another book that features grief very, very front and center. The heroine is, her husband has died. I think he's been dead for 5 years. They were high school sweethearts. He was killed very tragically, and she's really, again, struggling to move on from that. She meets a series of men in this book. The first man, who she has like a one-night stand, and then turns into this physical relationship, which then leads her to the second man, who she starts to feel things other than just a physical connection with. Like, she's starting to feel feelings, and that kind of scares her, but she's kind of trying to go with it because she feels like it's time to move on. and she's an artist. He invites her to his dad's home in another country because he's a big supporter of the arts, and he thinks that this might be something that will, you know, sort of propel her career. And so she goes there and she meets his dad, and that is the ultimate love match in this book, is this man's dad. So the angst in this book is very much centered around, obviously moving on from the grief, struggling with the feelings that she's had with her husband that are so dear and painful. But the other level of angst is she started to have feelings for this young man, and then when she meets his dad, who's also struggling with grief of his own, she feels that soul level connection, and not a shared trauma, but a similar trauma that they're trying to recover from. Like, they feel like there's something powerful when they meet them. Like, this is a case of these two people meet and they instantly know that they're meant to be in each other's lives. And it just absolutely slayed me in the best possible way. This book was painful to read, but ultimately has a happily ever after, and it's just absolutely beautiful, and I freaking adored it. It has a tiny bit of, not necessarily a full-on love triangle, but sort of those vibes where there's pain involved because one of them isn't chosen, obviously. So I freaking love that book, and I recommend it to people who specifically love emotional pain and angst, but also just a beautiful romance. Okay, and the next book I have is a historical. It's Ravishing the Heiress by Sherry Thomas. We read this for the Reiki Appreciation Society very early on in this year, and it was instantly a favorite of mine. I adore this book so freaking much for so many reasons. Sherry Thomas is a beautiful writer. This book is full of emotional turmoil and pain, and this is actually a case where the heroine is pining for the hero, which typically is something that I never enjoy. Like, I don't want to read about a heroine pining after the hero. The guy pining after her, absolutely, all day long. However, the way that this story was built and crafted, and it has like a sort of a forward and backwards timeline, which was so cleverly done, and I feel like added so much depth to the romance, just really captivated me. And I also just loved watching the hero, Fitzhugh, unravel and slowly realize the depth of his feelings for Millie. It was just fabulous. So they're in an arranged marriage, Millie and Fitzhugh. Millie is like powerfully in love with him. Like, it's really just like lust. She admires him. But gradually over time, it turns into love. And the angst element comes into play because he doesn't love her. It seriously is just a marriage of convenience for him. He doesn't even really recognize her in that way. He is in love with someone else. He believes himself to be in love with someone else. And so he's trying to end this marriage to get back to the woman that he loves. And it's just like the pain. This book had a lot of pain. This is also like a very layered book with a lot of different types of emotional situations happening. And I just freaking adored it. I loved it. Sherry Thomas, she knows how to write angst in a way that I just absolutely love. So this was an angsty historical, and I adored it. Now, this is a recent read and a recent favorite of mine, and it is The Last Kiss by Anna Bloom. So when I read this, it was on Kindle Unlimited. I feel like it is no longer on Kindle Unlimited. However, I think at least if you were in the US, you can buy the paperback, which this is. And isn't it gorgeous? Like, I saw this cover and I was like, I have to read that. This looks beautiful and painful, and I want both of those things. So this is an absolutely beautiful romance, and it is just like heart-achingly beautiful. It starts with our heroine who has had meningitis 2 years in the past, and that left her with a very, she's got heart problems, like pretty severe heart problems. And the book opens when she's at a doctor appointment, and her doctor is finally like, look, I've done everything I can for you. Things aren't looking good. I give you 6 months to a year to live unless you somehow find a heart transplant, which the cases of her finding that are very, very small because of the rare blood type that she has. And so when I read this, I didn't know if there was an HEA in it or not, but I was like, I was like invested, and I was like, I just have to know, even if it ends badly, I have to know. So I am going to tell you there is a happily ever after here, because I will never recommend a romance that doesn't have a happily ever after, and that is exactly what is in here. So the whole book, after she gets that sort of very dire future foretold to her at her doctor appointment, she goes to drown her sorrows in a local bar, and she ends up sitting next to this absolutely beautiful older French man. And they immediately feel this connection again, like this sort of mystical, something that is more than just a physical attraction. Like, obviously the physical attraction is there, but it's not just a case of, I really like your body, let's go do it. You know, like it's definitely more of like, you are very attractive, but I feel something else. Something else is drawing me to you. And I just love books like that that capture that feeling so well, and this did that for me. It was so beautiful. So they end up having a one-night stand. She's determined that there's not going to be any feelings involved because she believes she has this death sentence, and he is just like so swoony, such a swoony hero. But he goes along with her rules, and he's like, well, what can I call you? And she says, you can call me Juliet. Her name is actually Juliana. And because of some of the conversations that they have when they part, she leaves early after their one-night stand. When they part, he tries to track her down, and he ends up finding her place of employment, and he sends her this beautiful edition of Romeo and Juliet because she gave him the name of Juliet. And then they end up having a series of meetings, some of them by chance, and some of them are like premeditated, where he's trying to find her and where she's trying to find him. And each time they meet, they have very passionate nights together. And it's through that intimacy where the emotional connection is developing and growing and growing. And it's just so freaking beautiful, heart-achingly beautiful. And the last 50 pages of this book, like my heart was in my throat, like the whole time. I just absolutely love this book. The angst in this, the question of, are they going to be able to get together? What's going to happen? Like, oh my gosh, it was just so freaking beautiful. I loved it so much. I want everyone to read it. Okay, the next book that I have is, of course, Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. Now, Kennedy Ryan, I think, does write angst very well. She obviously is an emotional damage author, but she always pulls it out with a wonderful happily ever after. This book specifically had some circumstances between the hero and heroine because they're a divorced couple, they have experienced a lot of trauma and loss, and they're trying to live life, but obviously they still have feelings for one another. But they're trying to move on because, you know, they're divorced. There are some scenes in here specifically where she sees him with another woman that just like knife to the chest type of angst. And it's just absolutely beautiful. This, again, is a Kennedy Ryan book, so please proceed with caution. It is heavy, it is traumatic, but it is also equally beautiful and just romantic. And like the hero. I just loved it. I loved it so much. But yeah, I will never get over when I read about, from her point of view, when he was with another woman. I was like, oh my gosh, it just like hurt. It killed me. Okay, so the next book that I have to recommend is The Unwanted Wife. So this book is definitely angsty. This is about a contemporary romance, and it's an arranged marriage between Teresa and Sandro. So Teresa's father has this marriage arranged. It's sort of like mafia adjacent. It's not necessarily a mafia romance. Has this marriage arranged for business reasons, purposes, big empires, lots of money, all that stuff. And so she marries Sandro. And the interesting thing about this relationship is that they are extremely physically compatible, like tons of passion, lots of great nights together. However, after like so long they've been married and they've had this lots of passion, and she thinks that maybe this arranged marriage will work, her husband, Sandro, all of a sudden gets very cold and very distant from her. And she, after so much time has passed, like, she just can't take it anymore. And so she finally gets up the courage to ask for a divorce because she's done. She's done having a man who takes advantage of her body and what she thinks is a connection is forming. And then again, he goes cold and distant. And he says, you know what? No. However, I will divorce you if you give me a son first. And so thus proceeds the relationship. This book is often talked about for epic grovels, and I would agree. This hero absolutely grovels to the max to win her back, and it is beautiful in that way. I think that this book is, as far as like the pain, the turmoil in the relationship, I think this is pretty high, but it was fabulous. If you love angst and you haven't read this yet, I would highly recommend it. And it is on Kindle Unlimited, and it's one of the read and listen, so you can listen to the audiobook for free. Okay, now this book that I have to recommend is Knotted by Pam Godwin. So I kind of debated about whether or not I wanted to include this because this is a dark romance and it is very dark, as is typical for Pam Godwin. However, I think that the situations surrounding the dark events in here create a certain type of angst that just, like, hit all of my angst bells and whistles, you know? So this book starts out when our hero and heroine are 16. They're childhood sweethearts. They've been each other's firsts in so many ways. First kiss, first love. However, on the night that they finally decide to take their relationship to the next level and have that other first, a very violent act happens and that is ripped away from the heroine specifically, and her first is taken forcefully, viscerally, graphically by someone else. And this sets a chain of events happening in the book which separates them, which causes both of them to undergo these severe changes in their lives and emotional changes because of what happens that one night from that act of violence that would tear them apart. However, they find their way back together in a set of very, not necessarily unusual circumstances, in a set of circumstances that are very much surrounding power and submissive and dominance, and specifically in sex. And I think that this book is extremely powerful. It is very dark. Like, I've read quite a lot of Pam Godwin's books. I've read some of what would be considered the darkest, and none of them have actually affected me as much as the opening graphic scene in this book did. And I think that has everything to do with the buildup of this sweet couple and what they were hoping to be, and then what was eventually taken and changed and set them on a completely different future. So I loved this book. This book was painful. The angst was very high, and it is very dark. So if you love Pam Godwin and you haven't read this book yet, like, you have to. It's fantastic. Okay, now the last book that I have is a historical, and it is When He Was Wicked by Julia Quinn. I do feel like if you're into Bridgerton at all, you've probably read this book. This is my favorite book in the series. It is absolutely beautiful and angsty and just swoony. I loved it. The basic premise of this is Francesca Bridgerton and Michael. Michael is he, I can't ever remember his title. Is he Duke and Earl? I don't know. I'm very sorry. Anyway, Michael ends up seeing Francesca at a dinner one night, and he is just, like, so captivated with her. Like, he cannot take his eyes off of her. He just finds her just so compelling and wants to be next to her. However, the situation is a bit awkward because he meets her at a dinner celebration for her wedding to his cousin. Then events happen, and she is suddenly a free woman, and Michael really struggles with wanting to be in her life and struggling with, how am I going to do that? Because, you know, she was with my cousin, and it's just angsty, delicious, beautiful, romantic. I feel like this book is kind of on a different level than the other Bridgerton books because it is such high angst, and I think that creates a different type of feel in the romance, whereas a lot of the other ones are kind of happy and almost rom-com-y. Like, this one feels different and angsty, and I love it so much. So, okay, there you have it. Those are my angsty romance recommendations. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you for another one next time.